Hello everyone and welcome to Wild Old Times, a podcast about the weird, obscure and forgotten parts of Irish history. My name is Ciaran Conliffe, and on this episode I'll be talking to you about the theft of the Irish crown jewels. Two pieces of British crown jewellery were held in Dublin Castle at the beginning of the 20th century, both parts of the regalia of the Order of St. Patrick. The order was founded in 1783 by George III as a way of recognising political loyalty in Ireland, much like the Order of the Thistle in Scotland and the Order of the Garter in England. Like all chivalric orders of the UK, it was sworn to service of the Crown. The Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, the Governor of Ireland for the King, was the Grand Master of the Order. There were 22 knights in the Order, each of which had a ceremonial golden collar. Those collars were valued at about £1,000 at the time, worth about 24,000 in today's money. But they paled in comparison to the value of the Grand Master's regalia. Originally, he just had a slightly fancier collar, but in 1831 William IV gifted the order a star and badge for the Grand Master to wear. 394 high-quality jewels studded the two pieces. The badge and the star were studded in diamonds, and each had a shamrock made of emeralds, a St. Patrick's cross in rubies, and the motto of the order in pink diamonds on them. Combined, they would be worth about £3.5 million in today's money, but in real terms as crown jewels they are officially priceless. That's a legal definition. Crown jewels cannot be insured as they cannot be replaced. They are utterly unique, and in 1907 they went missing. In July 1907, King Edward VII and his wife Alexandra visited Dublin to attend the Irish International Exhibition. This was a World's Fair of style event that showcased Irish industry to the globe. Before it even began, the royal visit was overshadowed by the greatest theft in Irish history since the Táin. 4 days before their arrival, an office messenger found a safe in Dublin Castle unlocked that really should have been locked. When they opened it, instead of a collection of valuables, they found only empty cases and a single piece of ribbon. The contents, including 5 of the order's golden collars and the 2 priceless pieces of crown jewellery, were gone. The man who had been looking after these jewels was Sir Arthur Vickers. He was the Ulster King of Arms, the person in charge of heraldry across Ireland. He was allowed to grant and certify coats of arms for noble families in Ireland. This is more complicated than you might think. Some symbols were tied to specific families, so being allowed to use them depended on showing a link to that family. Vickers had an overwhelming interest in heraldry since he was a child. His father was English, his mother was Irish, and both had died when he was young. So he spent his childhood being passed between their two families. He attended Oxford, and after graduating he tried to get a job in heraldry. Eventually he got the post as Ulster King of Arms at the relatively young age of 29. He loved this job, but there was one aspect of it he wasn't that fond of. The Ulster King of Arms was the registrar of the Order of St. Patrick, responsible not just for looking after its insignia, but also for organising all its functions. Vickers made no secret of disliking this duty and thinking of it as a distraction from his real work. This attitude would come back to haunt him. In theory, the jewels had been totally secure. They were meant to be kept inside a safe, inside a strong room, inside Bedford Tower. There were few holes in this security, though. The door to the tower had 7 different keys, including one held by the cleaner, and was only locked when the tower was empty. The strong room was impressive. Thick fireproof walls and a 2-ton steel door with a lockable grille behind it. In practice, the grille was almost always unlocked with a key in it. The door to the strong room was in the castle library on the ground floor of Bedford Tower. It was also sometimes left unlocked, since rare manuscripts were kept in the strong room and scholars might want to consult them. The real problem with the strong room, though, was what wasn't in it: the safe. When the safe room was constructed in 1903, it turned out the safe didn't fit through the door. The safe was put in the library as a temporary measure until they got a smaller safe or widened the door. The temporary measure was still in place 6 years later, so the safe was accessible to anyone who got into the tower. It's not surprising that Vickers never got round to ordering a safe that would fit in the room. His attitude to security was lackadaisical at best. He would often show the jewels off to any visitors he wanted to impress, and would leave the strong room unlocked at night. This would also come back to haunt him. The 6th of July was a Saturday, normally a quiet day in the Tower, but not with a royal visit on the horizon. While the King was in Dublin, he was going to induct Lord Castletown into the Order of St. Patrick, and Vickers had a lot to organise. This is why he didn't pay much attention when he was told the strong room had been left unlocked the night before, or to the package on his desk when he came in. It contained a golden collar, one that had belonged to Baron Dudley Fitzgerald de Ross. He had died in March, and his collar had been returned to the order. It had been sent for cleaning and was now to be stored with the rest. Around 2:15 in the afternoon, Vickers asked William Stivey, the office manager, to take the collar down and put it in the safe. So Stivey took the collar in its box and went down to the library. He had never opened the safe before and had some trouble unlocking it, before he realised it was already unlocked. Disturbed, he decided not to open it and went straight upstairs to tell Vickers. Vickers immediately ran to the safe and opened it. At first it all looked normal. The boxes that should contain the jewels were all still there. Then he opened the box that held the crown jewels. It was empty, except for a single ribbon. All the boxes were empty. The jewels were gone. Vickers immediately sent notice to the Dublin Metropolitan Police. Assistant Commissioner William Vesey Harrell was the first on the scene, along with Detective Superintendent John Lowe. The two policemen examined the safe and asked the relevant questions. It was determined that the last time the safe was opened officially was on the 11th of June, when the jewels were shown to a visitor. A state of mild panic ensued, as more and more senior officials became involved in the investigation. When asked to name a suspect, Vickers at first pointed to his coachman Phillips as someone who had access to his keys. Phillips would be found innocent by the investigation quite quickly, but it was so traumatic he wound up emigrating to America. Vickers had three subordinates in his office: the Dublin Herald, the Cork Herald, and Athlone Pursuivant. These were ancient offices that had sat empty for years before Vickers revived them. He did this in order to appoint people in exchange for favours. None of them were paid a salary, but the titles had a lot of prestige. The Cork Herald was his nephew, Pierce Gunn Mahoney. He was the only one of the three who did any actual work in the office. Athlone Pursuivant was an Englishman named Francis Bennett Goldney. He was an antiques collector like Vickers, and had persuaded him to give him the post because he thought it would help him become an MP. Goldney was elected Mayor of Canterbury in 1905, and after that he barely showed up in the Dublin office. Of course, he was on his way over to take part in the royal visit. The Dublin Herald was Francis Shackleton, older brother of the famous explorer Ernest Shackleton. Vickers got him the job in exchange for Francis paying half the rent and expenses on a house in Dublin with him, even though Shackleton spent most of his time in England. He was also on his way back to Dublin for the royal visit. Shackleton was a social butterfly. He was a member of 2 clubs in London and frequently attended dinner parties. The week before the theft, he said something at one of those parties that he'd soon regret. Someone mentioned the crown jewels in Dublin Castle, and Shackleton joked that he wouldn't be surprised to hear they'd be stolen, since he didn't think much of their security. Fortunately for him, the people at the party would remember those words. On Monday the 8th of July, Inspector John Keane of Scotland Yard arrived in Dublin. Keane had been born in County Kerry, though he'd lived in London for decades. He brought with him a copy of the Statutes of the Order of St. Patrick, which included a detailed description of the missing items. The police had already issued a notice to the public with a drawing of them, offering a substantial reward for any information. They'd also dismantled the safe and examined it. No scratches from picking, and no damage from using a crude copied key made from a wax impression. The safe had been opened either by an original key or by a high-quality copy. In order to make a copy that good, a locksmith would need to have had the original key for a full day. The press were speculating that the theft was the work of a London-based gang. The police were starting to think it was an inside job. Inspector Keane agreed. The ribbon left in the box was a crucial clue. It had been attached to the badge with screws, but had been removed without tearing it. Detaching the ribbon would have taken about 5 minutes of work. The wrapping paper for the collars was also neatly folded and returned to the boxes. This wasn't a simple smash and grab. It was the work of someone who felt comfortable in the building. The fact that other valuables in the library were untouched also pointed to a focused and planned piece of work. Vickers was, at the time, unwilling to suspect any of his hand-picked staff members. In fact, Vickers originally thought the whole theft was a prank that had got out of hand. As the days went by, though, he realised that this wasn't the case. He even enlisted the help of a Dublin psychic to find the jewels, but this just led to a wild goose chase to Clonsilla. And he got an offer of help from a distant cousin, the writer Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes. Vickers never took him up on the offer, but Doyle took inspiration from the theft for some of his stories. The adventure of the Bruce Partington plans about a theft from a safe in a government office draws heavily on the case. The victim in the story is said to be modelled after Pierce Gunn Mahoney, and the murderer after Francis Shackleton. Everyone used the case as an excuse to push their own agenda. Pat O'Brien, an Irish nationalist MP, blamed the Unionists in a speech in Parliament. He said they'd done it to embarrass the government and to strike at the idea of an Irish chivalric order. Other people blamed the Irish Republican Brotherhood, saying they'd done it to embarrass the government and to strike at the idea of an Irish chivalric order. The notion of a professional theft was also still quite popular. By September, no real progress had been made. Pressure was beginning to come down for someone to take responsibility for the theft. Sir Arthur Vickers was well aware that he would be expected to resign if nobody was caught. He needed someone to take the blame, and he decided that Francis Shackleton was the best scapegoat. Shackleton's comments before the theft had annoyed Vickers, and a series of minor arguments widened the rift. There was another reason why the authorities were prejudiced against Shackleton. He was a homosexual, in an era where that was still a crime. Even if he had no personal motive for the theft, he could have been blackmailed into helping a criminal gang. But this also made them cautious. As a member of high society in both London and Dublin, Shackleton was acquainted with other influential people who shared the same secret. This is probably why Kane's original report on the theft went missing and is still lost to this day. Lord Aberdeen, who was the Governor of Ireland, and the King also made reference to disagreeable disclosures in a series of letters. But Vickers wasn't free of scandal either. It became clear that he was in the habit of hosting drunken parties at Bedford Tower. Worse, Aberdeen's son was a guest at these parties. Details of the get-togethers were so scandalous that Aberdeen had to arrange a secret meeting in Scotland between Assistant Commissioner Harrell and the King to personally explain them. All of this led the powers that be to decide that Vickers had to go. Shackleton, of course, also had to be got rid of. So did Francis Bennett Goldney, who they thought was also gay. Pierce Gunn Mahoney would be allowed to stay if he behaved. On the 23rd of October, they sent Vickers a letter telling him that the Office of Arms would be reconstituted and that all current members were relieved of duty. Shackleton and Goldney accepted the inevitable and resigned. But Sir Arthur Vickers did not take the news well at all. He wrote a scathing letter, outraged that he was being fired before any inquiry took place. He pointed out that this would make it look like he was involved in the theft, and insisted they had been fooled by false rumours. His half-brother, the Irish nationalist leader Pierce O'Mahony, who was a former MP, took up his cause in Westminster. Incidentally, he was also the father of Pierce Gunn Mahoney. Vickers was convinced by now that Shackleton was the thief, and O'Mahony agreed with him. But he thought Shackleton had an accomplice, Captain Richard Gorges. Gorges was born in County Roscommon, but moved to South Africa when he was 12 years old. At the age of 20, he joined the militia to put down an uprising by the local Matabele people, and this gave him a taste for the military life. In 1897, he joined the police force, which was more of an occupation army than anything else, and claimed on his form to have military experience with the Canadian Dragoons. In 1899, the Second Boer War broke out, and he joined a troop led by General Alexander Thornycroft. In March of 1900, he was dishonourably discharged for sodomy, but he avoided prosecution and managed to get several other military postings before moving back to Britain in 1902. He became a firearms instructor for the Royal Irish Regiment with the rank of captain. At some point before 1907, he became the friend and lover of Francis Shackleton, and he was one of the people who attended the parties at Bedford Tower. One story from those parties that sparked people's interest was that, while Vickers was drunk and unconscious, someone had taken his key to the safe and used it to remove the crown jewels. Different versions had Vickers wake up wearing them or receive them in the post the next day. The story was doubly scandalous because it exposed the almost criminal lack of security around the jewels. A version of the story appeared in the Gaelic American, a New York Fenian newspaper. Who had played this prank varied in the telling. The Lord Aberdeen's son was a favourite for people to blame. Luckily for him and his father, he had been out of the country when the jewels went missing for real. With Vickers refusing to resign, the government had to take action. At the start of 1908, a viceregal commission was established by Lord Aberdeen, under his authority as Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. It had been 6 months since the jewels were stolen, and the police investigation had gone nowhere. There was no need to bring in the scandal of homosexuality, since it was clear that security had been totally inadequate. The commission was held in the library of Bedford Tower, literally the scene of the crime. Vickers saw the whole thing as the establishment closing ranks to protect Shackleton. Once his lawyers established that the hearing would not be made public, and that had no ability to call witnesses and compel testimony, he knew that the verdict was already decided. Shackleton and his lawyers walked out. This grandstanding move made for good headlines on the day, but allowed the government a free hand in the commission. They dug into the fact that the safe wasn't in the strong room, and to the fact that the doors were often left unlocked. What there wasn't much investigation into was the actual theft. The closest was when Inspector Ciaran was called as a witness. He confirmed that Vickers had accused Shackleton and gave his own theory. This boiled down to the idea that someone in the office had stolen the jewels well before they were found missing, and then arranged to be out of the country when the theft was discovered. This theory would have made Shackleton or Goldney the likely thief, since they were in England. Shackleton also gave evidence, and made a good showing of it. He managed to make himself look innocent by pointing out how easy it would have been for him to get copies of Vickers' keys, and then saying that almost anyone else could have done the same. After he gave his testimony, and as he was leaving, he was taken into a private room. Assistant Commissioner Harrell and 2 other officials showed him all the evidence they had gathered on his homosexuality. He wasn't going to be charged, but he was told to never return to Dublin again. As far as we know, he never did. Officially, he was exonerated. In fact, the Commission's report specifically cleared him, but the press treated him as being guilty for the rest of his life. On the 30th of January, the day before the Commission released his report, Vickers was fired. For a few weeks he'd been able to manipulate the press, but when the report was published and it became clear how bad the security was, they turned on him. In one last display of pettiness, Vickers refused to return the key to the strong room. Workmen had to break a hole in the wall to retrieve regalia needed for an upcoming state function. Ironically, some of them were the same men who had failed to get the safe into the room back in 1903. So the case ended with another break-in at Dublin Castle. None of those involved in the theft came out of it well, and none of them did well afterwards. Poor Pierce Gunn Mahoney died tragically in 1914. He was found dead on some marshland on his family estate. He'd been out hunting and had been killed by his own shotgun. As far as anyone can tell, it looks like the trigger had caught on a barbed wire fence he was climbing. The gun went off and shot him in the chest at point-blank range. Francis Shackleton went back to his life in England, where he made his money acting as a financial advisor for his upper-class friends. Generally, this consisted of diverting their money from stable investments in England into his land speculation deals in South America. These were almost all Ponzi schemes, a con trick where the dividends were paid from new investments. They're named after Charles Ponzi, but this was over a decade before Ponzi was caught out. When Shackleton's schemes inevitably collapsed in 1910, he was declared bankrupt. He went on the run to West Africa. In 1912, he was extradited to England, where he was sentenced to 15 months for fraud. His family agreed to support him when he was released on condition that he change his name to Frank Mellor. It was his great-grandmother's maiden name. He opened an antique shop in Sussex and lived there until his death in 1941. Richard Gorges, the man implicated as Shackleton's possible accomplice, rejoined the British Army as a captain at the start of World War I. By January 1915, he managed to resign his commission and return to London. His health was in tatters. He had chronic headaches and was a serious alcoholic. By the summer, he had developed the habit of drunkenly firing his revolver out of his bedroom window at night. Because of this, 2 policemen came to his lodgings one morning. Gorges shot and killed one of them. Due to his medical history, he was found guilty of manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility. He still went to prison, and most of people expected him to die there. But he survived. He died in 1944 after falling under a London Underground train, and nobody knew if it was accident or suicide. Sir Arthur Vickers never fully recovered from the mental ordeal of his disgrace and dismissal. He remained obsessed with the trial, and had fantasies of a unionist government coming to power in Dublin and taking vengeance for him. In 1912, he moved to a country house his sister owned in Kerry, but then a bombshell dropped. The London Mail published a story about the theft of the jewels. They claimed that the jewels were stolen by Vickers' mistress, jealous because he was having an affair with a married woman. The story was patently ridiculous, and wound up being a windfall for Vickers. He sued them, won, and was awarded £5,000 in damages. It was enough for him to retire uncomfortably, and he even got married in 1917. His retirement did not last long, though. During the War of Independence, country houses like his were prime targets for attacks by the IRA. In 1920, his house was raided, and he was held at gunpoint. In 1921, the house was attacked again. This time it was burned down, and Sir Arthur Vickers was shot dead. A sign was left around his neck accusing him of being a spy for the British government. When his will was read, a part of it was kept sealed and not to be released to the public until 1976. It turned out to be one last tirade against his enemies and one last accusation against Francis Shackleton. For what it's worth, though, I don't think Shackleton did it. My favourite suspect is the other man named Francis Bennett Goldney. At the time of the theft, he was the Mayor of Canterbury. He was also the honorary curator of the Royal Museum in the city and loved collecting antiques. He had taken the job of Athlone Pursuivant to help him become an MP. He avoided the scandal around the jewels by resigning quietly, and in 1910 he managed to become MP for Canterbury. In 1917, still serving as an MP, he became part of the British Embassy in Paris. The following year he was killed in a car accident, and he's listed on the War Memorial as a casualty of World War I. After he died, it turned out that he had a secret side. His collection was not all entirely legally obtained. He had stolen several antique documents from the museum, 2 chalices from the cathedral, a painting belonging to the Duke of Bedford, and more. The city of Canterbury had to take his family to court to get their stuff back. Why do I think he did it? Partially it's because he fits Inspector Kane's theory. He could easily have stolen the jewels and taken them back to England weeks before they were discovered, then stayed to give himself an alibi. And he has the right psychology. If any of the other suspects had stolen the jewels, they would have either sold them and been caught, or secretly returned them to defuse the scandal. Goldney would have been perfectly happy with them in a secret vault somewhere, just knowing that he owned them. If he did steal them, then the chances are that they still are in a secret vault somewhere. But if they aren't, they could be anywhere. They could have been smuggled to the continent, or America, broken up and sold, or they could still be stashed somewhere. In 1983, a woman told a reporter that her grandfather had been part of a Republican group that stole the jewels and buried them on a farm south of Dublin. The farm was searched with a metal detector, but no buried treasure was found. That's not the only time someone's claimed to know the secret of the missing jewels. Maybe one day the true story will come out and we'll know for sure what happened, or maybe it'll remain a mystery for the ages. Thank you for listening to Wild Old Times, a fortnightly podcast about Irish history. Our logo is by Liffey Designs. Check them out at liffeydesigns.co.uk. The opening theme is The Cat That Ate the Candle. The closing theme is The Parting Glass. Both were recorded by Gregory Mahan and are used under a Creative Commons license. Check out his site at tinwhistler.com. Wild Old Times is recorded at Farset Labs in Belfast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider giving it a review wherever you find it. It really does help us out. And if you really enjoyed it, tell your friends. Either way, I hope you come back for another wild old time from Irish history.